that whole episode of Genesis as a fully Caucasian thing. They didn't look at those as Nubian people. The ancient Egyptians saw all that, the whole Adam and Eve story, as the birth of a new race of people who had wars amongst themselves, and the tribe of Abel was born against the tribe of Cain, and Cain deceived him and did wrong by him, and it was supposed to be a fair battle, like if two men get into a ring and they're fighting a martial arts battle because they're supposed to represent their tribe, and like in the circle of iron, I cheat just because I want to win. And when the referee says, take a break, I bite your ear off. Right? And I start to cheat, and I think I should win. Well, that's what Cain did not follow the laws of the order that they were trying to be initiated into, but they were being transformed into Elohims. And he never made it. He went the other direction. And in Genesis chapter 4, from 24 to about 28, will tell you the whole story of how he was not respected and how he was transformed into the devil. Because it literally says that if you do the right thing, everything will be cool. But if you persist on violating the laws and going against the laws, then sin lies at the door, and unto you shall be his desire, and you shall rule over him. Meaning, the devil will desire to lure you into his world. Once he gets you into his world, you start perpetrating devilish men. You start having your own parties, in other words. First, you go out with the intent to go to a party to have fun. When you get to a party, you learn how to have parties. Then you're setting up the parties where people are coming to get drunk. So in ancient Egypt, they looked at that whole episode and set as Satuk, and how they worshiped Satuk, another group of people, and it was a totally different philosophy. When we get down to the Sumerian part of it, the Akkadian or cuneiform part of the doctrine, they are looking at it from the Mizraim chapter. And they're trying to say, if you go back to Genesis chapter 2, you'll find that Cush or Ethiopia is mentioned in the Bible before Genesis chapter 10, which means Cush is mentioned before Cush was born. Right? So therefore there was Cushites existing around the Nile and around the Tigris-Euphrates Valley before the flood and before Noah was even born. But they have the Bible story where Cush comes out to be a descendant of Noah. You follow? So who is the Cush that we find prior to that? That's because those original people, Cushites, were in Africa. The flood lifted from there, and the boat landed over there in Ararat. It didn't start over there. It lifted from Africa and landed there, and then there was a migration of the tribes trying to get back home. And when Mizraim, who was from that tribe, got back into Egypt, he set up the first dynasty and became known as Namir, or Menes. When they say Menes as a substitute name for Namir, they're really saying Masr. And Masr is the word they use for Egypt, and the Jews took it over and called it Mitzrayim. It's Masr and Mitzrayim, they're all the same word. And that same Namir, if you saw him in any history, they show you him with his hand like this, grabbing a man's hair, with a club in his hand, right? And on the tablet they have. And he's got a certain kind of crown on, very similar to the one you have on. Then if you see the statue of the god Baal, or Baal, they show him standing in the same position with his hand grasped, but there's nobody in it because that was chipped off of the stela, and he had the same club in his hand. Because Menes was Baal, Baal was Adonis. It's all the same people. And that was the original seed of Cush coming back into Africa. When they came back into Africa, one of the people amongst them that was prominent and strong, name was Ham. Ham. So this Ham breeds a tribe called Hamites or Hamites. Another group who moves further south, or Hamites, become known as Cushites. The ones who stayed up near the Mediterranean Sea become known as Foothites, and later on they become Libya. And the ones who settled to the east of that became known as Mitzrayim, and they later called them Egyptians. So the Hamites became known as the Sudanese, the Cushites became known as the Ethiopians, the Foothites became known as the Libyans, and the Mitzrayim became known as the Egyptians. And these were names given to them by the Phoenicians and the Greeks, because this wasn't in their own language. You follow? So when we start picking up on those stories, we got to understand how those migrations took place and how they got over into the Middle East in order to get back over into Egypt. And when they started in Egypt, they came back in with what? with Sumerian customs. So the original indigenous Tarites, the Nubians, who were pygmies, were overthrown by them, and that's why they show you them as servants to the dynastic periods. And that's where Bes was the chief of the Nubians, and he had the powers of a sorcerer. So they didn't bother him. They kept him, and to this very day in Egypt, they have rituals to Bes. They added it in the language without the T as the Bes. That's how afraid they were, the same way that the Italians were afraid when they went to Africa and got involved with the Yoruba. When they went to Cuba, America, messed with Cubans, and they was over there dealing with Santeria, they backed off. They was like, well, they backed off. They took them months just to get Noriego out, and only got him out because he gave up on his voodoo and went to a Catholic church. And that's where they got him. As long as he was working with them Obia, or those Obas, they couldn't touch him. So the Tamil who is petrified of Santeria Yoruba, he wouldn't go near those people. So that was a part of our culture. Those original Pathites, which were in tune with the forces of nature, becomes to them voodoo. Whenever you deal with nature and say, well, I acknowledge the great mother of the sea, may you call her Ogun, and the God of the air, and the God of the water, and the God of the earth that grows the food that I eat, and the God of the sun. You know, when you start doing that, they freak out and say, oh, you're a pagan. Meanwhile, they have eased paganism into their religion by going to church on Sunday. If I say they ease it, they're still, you know, and God is the light. They always show Jesus with a big halo over his head or a ring around his head like a sun ring, you know, and that's a symbol of the sun. They're afraid to break away from those spiritual powers. When those people came back from Samaria, they came with all these new costumes on. When they came through Phoenicia, they picked up the headdress of the Iri in Hebrew. Iri is the Hebrew word for lion. In other words, when the people that you meet from Jamaica saying Iri, they're saying lion. Right? That headdress was a sign of the Sphinx. Everybody was getting back to the Sphinx because everybody was waiting for that 25,000 year cycle when the constellation of Leo or the lion would come, because the lion would stand up and our so-called history, I have to say history because how they trick the language, or our story would renew itself. And we come back into the knowledge of self and kind, and a transformation from mortality to immortality will start to take place. And the devil can't handle that. This is what was taking place back then. So they were trying to get back across, and they brought in customs. When they got there, they was confronted by the Tarites or the Pathites, the Ethiopian pygmies. And they hated them, so they suppressed them, and they enslaved them, and they took over Egypt and set up a new genetic structure called the 46 dynasties. And during the reign of the 46 dynasties, when they was traveling from land to land teaching, way over in the land of Kedman, which the Bible tells you the original name of Canaan, where a cursed seed of people was there, they called the place El Bras. If you look up in the dictionary on El Bras, you'll find that that's the main seat in the Caucasus Mountain. It's also the word Abras for leprosy in the scriptures. And those Canaanite people who were in someone else's land because their God had given them someone else's land called the land of Canaan, you follow? Decided to go pursue the wealth that they heard about at the Nile, where their God reported to them, the gold over there is good. The same way they came out of Europe to America when they heard, when they saw Native Americans with pure gold, and they heard the gold in America was good, and there was a migration of gold rush. The same thing happened a long time ago. History does tend to repeat itself, right? So they was coming over there to conquer. So the Hyksos knew they couldn't just come in and fight the pygmies, but the pygmies had their brother tribe called the Watusis, you know what I mean, or the Dinka, the Dang, behind them now protect them because they saw the pygmies as gods. You follow? So they had to ease their way in. So over a period of time, they snuck their way in the same way they snuck their way into America. They came from France, they came from Poland, they came from Scotland, they came from Egypt, easily here, and then eventually took over the country and called it theirs. They did the exact same thing in ancient Egypt. They eased their way in, and eventually they established themselves as the Hiket Chasus, or the Hyksos. Some people say shepherd kings, others call them shepherd prisoners. They call them shepherd prisoners because the implication is that they were in bondage in Egypt, and it wasn't even in Egypt, they were in Memphis. When you say in Egypt, like saying I'm in the United States, but I'm only in Georgia. And it's better to say I'm in Georgia. But they said we ruled Egypt when in fact they only ruled Memphis. And that was for only 400 years before Atmos in them rose up. Again, you look at Atmos, you can see he belongs to the original Nubian tribes, conquered them and chased them back to the land of Canada. This is all in history, and that's around the 17th to the 19th dynasty. And our lodges base our teachings on the man. It's called Sukenwe Toa, right? He was the man, a Toa or a Ta'ite, that had the secret that these Israelites, these three Israelites, the first three sons of Jacob, Reuben, Simon, and Levi, wanted. Levi got most of the secrets, the Levites, and set up a priesthood called the Brotherhood of Leviathan. And they became the law over the scriptures. They knew all the Egyptian laws, but they didn't get the passwords, and they didn't get the master key, which was hidden in the ninth chamber by Nammuz, who got it when he came in. So they were in bondage, and that's your whole Israelite story. So when you deal with that Bible and trying to compare it to the Egyptian and the Sumerian, it flows very easy. Black Book Part 2 makes it very clear. It ties everything right up like I'm doing now and shows you the places to match it up. The way I teach is I spatter out information and want you to sit down and bring it together. I want you to be a part of the learning process and start just dictating you like you're not a God. You are a God, so you're responsible. When I put that info out there, you're responsible to take the pieces and put the puzzle together and then say, aha, I see that. Sometimes I'll say something and say, I don't understand that. And you have to wait 6 months later, I'll walk around and start talking about that. Then you go, that's the missing piece of that puzzle. That's my methodology. You know what I'm saying? That makes you a part of the learning process, and therefore it makes it something that you know, not something that you were taught. Like education, all right?
The surrounding trees are more than just a backdrop to village life. In all of the most important respects, the old ways still live on.